Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Carmine's Arena, a cultural gourmet of information, if you will, a feast for your mind and soul. And now, without further delay, the man, the myth, the maestro, Carmine Arena.
Greetings, and welcome once again to Carmine's Arena, site of contest and conflict, venue for and of resolution. Resolution in terms of focus, remedy, and commitment, both yours and mine, to the preservation, the propagation, and indeed the celebration of Western civilization. In the last two episodes, I discoursed upon the lethal consequences of political correctness and invited all to be stirred awake. For we have been gulled by the political correctness to the point where it has been gift-wrapped by misspent prosperity and beribboned by the ignorance of the learned. It makes for a decorative package, yet a package empty of contents, like the kind one sees in shop windows as part of window dressing. Thus, political correctness, my friends, is fundamentally dishonest, deceitful, deceptive, and utterly in disguise. In this episode number 85, I shall attempt to rattle the chain of an otherwise honest existence by finding in that chain its weakest links damaged by insincerity, become irony, become cleverness, become our hipster culture. Allow me first to set the scene with a few preliminaries. It was Edgar Allan Poe who often wondered about man's unfathomable longing to vex the self. His writings offer frightful accounts based on the predicate and has been my perception as I've learned from him. Freud would later declare to his readers that the self is too irrevocably split to ever truly know what it's up to. Shakespeare's insightful statement, "All the world's a stage," forecasts all there is to observe about ourselves, we who roam about strangers to who it is who occupies our skin, while we play a part. Small wonder that our skin is the largest organ of the anatomy. Our covering has much to hide. And some hides, pun intended, are so thick, the self shall always remain a stranger, or worse, an unfriendly alien. Proof of this can be unfolded in the birth of irony, saying one thing but meaning the other. This results from the nagging incongruities and complexities of human experience adrift in a vast sea of amorality. Adrift, sans sail nor anchor, just a lot of hot wind in our face. Irony, however brilliant and electrifying, is the rightful slayer of one of man's greatest pretenses, and that is sincerity. A portrayal best enacted in the muck inscribed in greeting cards, or best advertised on bumper stickers, or breaking into a fortune cookie, and or making an effort to listen to a sincere campaign address from politicians who are forever rediscovering the self of themselves in little old you, me, us, and them. Such is the black hole of ego. Sincerity comes from the Latin sincerus, originally referring not to people, but substances that were whole and unadulterated. It took on its present dubious meaning, would you believe, in 1533. The book to read is Sincerity, how a moral ideal born 500 years ago inspired religious wars, modern art, hipster chic, and the curious notion that we all have something to say. This excellent read is by R.J. McGill, Jr. Now, it stands to reason that if we were to become purely, unmitigatingly sincere, marriages would rupture, friendships would founder, and no one would ever sit through a faculty meeting again. On a personal note, I sat only for exactly 3 faculty meetings, and thereafter sincerely escaped all the many others. For you see, academia suffers from the sickness of self-regard in the absence of self-respect. Take this telling account, for example. I quote the distinguished playwright David Mamet, a once sincere liberal who's become a thoughtful conservative, personally having been mugged by reality. My father bluffed his way into Northwestern law, said Mamet, on the GI Bill, having perhaps finished only 2 years of community college. He nonetheless graduated first in his class. I asked him what his secret was, and he explained that he didn't ever realize how little was required of him, unquote. So much for faculty meetings and education conferences. As an aside, we shall one day consider in Carmine's Arena how profound are educators' sincerity when they allow, for example, boys and girls to be taught in the same way. Thus, boys who misbehave are punished as if they're bad girls. It would be amusing if it were not so profoundly sick, so counterintuitive, so politically correct. You see why, don't you? You see why irony has had to become the slayer of sincerity. Though what remains of sincerity's corpse is gathered up ever so carefully by the clever. Ah, yes, the clever, which I'll get to momentarily, for they are each in his or her cannibalistic turn, a real piece of work. But to get back to irony, and also the world being a stage, understand that good old irony, forget mere heroin, is the biggest, most stubborn addiction of all. Irony is that deep down craving to mean 2 things at once, to be in 2 places at once, so as not to be there for the catastrophe of a fixed meaning. In fact, one of my most favorite people to quote, Oscar Wilde, said, "The one thing I fear the most is not being misunderstood." Thus, you can readily perceive that cynics are disappointed romantics and ironists are closet sentimentalists. Each long for double meanings and has a crush on ambiguity. Now let us attend to my treatment of the clever as promised. Allow me first to make clear that stupidity that is not congenital nor insincere by intention can yet be force-fed nutriments which eventually may energize clarity and the gentle tug towards comprehension. Whereas cleverness is an incurable affliction of rather durable omissions, chief among which is the ambition to pursue paths of least resistance, avoiding challenge at all costs. Cleverness is to be understood as very much that sly child who chooses to show affection for one or the other parent in turn, so to escape the sterner sanctions of both simultaneously. 'Tis the game of divide and conjure. Such a gamester rarely matures. The only thing that ripens is evermore of clevermore fester, bulking up on the empty calories, and his or her lumpen calumnies, usually wry and sly tested. Hence cleverness develops and perfects skills with staging and props, so as to foist upon all too guilt-ridden loved ones the practitioner's own shortcomings, his bundle of blunders and unending dependence, having it theatrically appear that charity forever owes the aging brat an unpayable debt, all the way back to mommy and daddy's wedding and baby starring in mommy dearest's trimesters, and to be nursed thereafter and ever after on the plentiful supply of milky chutzpah. I am sure, darn sure, you're all tripped over the likes of these ripened affected tykes who live to become archetypes, that variety who never really leave home. Whoever remains loyal to this cold, cruel, grieving, cunning, and controlling construct begs two questions. Whom have you neglected and betrayed in greedy clever's stead? And or have you become as clever a deadhead too? For cleverness, lust for enablers and converts is absolutely beyond measure, whether through blood or marriage or both. In consequence, being a schnurrer and a moocher, while ever questing for those facile paths of least resistance, begets its ultimate bitter harvest, and that is the starvation of the dude's selfhood, the dude ever finding himself in another's theatrical trappings. Now perhaps more is revealed of the unfathomable need for the soul to vex itself, and how by the practice and dynamics of cleverness, intelligence itself becomes diluted to finally gel into self-defeat covered by a grin. The theme is suitable for cutesy-wootsy amateur theater and the hipster culture upon which I shall now focus. Have you out there ever heard of the 27 Club? Rock and roll's most dangerous number. It's the age that Kurt Cobain, Janis Joplin, and Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison melted away. This sad group, saturated with drugs and alcohol, continues with a roster of 27 clubs dearly departed, namely Ron Pigpen McKernan of the Grateful Dead, who died of gastrointestinal bleeding linked to alcohol abuse, Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones, Chris Bell of Big Star, Dee Boone of the Minutemen, Delta bluesman Robert Johnson, and some 43 others. Fast forward to our most recent hipster to join the 27 Club, Amy Winehouse, stone cold dead at 27. 27 appears to be the age the body refuses to tolerate profound addiction of one or another kind, the age that fate decides to give you a disease. Have you murdered or wrapped your car around a telephone pole? Hello? This is death calling you out, should be the song shouted out. Years ago, the noted baritone John Charles Thomas appeared on the Groucho Marx TV show. The heretofore smug and egotistical persona, which was the Marx trademark, quickly arose from his perch, a tall stool, and bowed respectfully before his guest. Then immediately asked, "Mr. Thomas, can you in a word please describe rock and roll?" The singer responded, "Insincerity." "Bravo," say I. And there you have, having come full circle to that word again, sincerity. Sincerity negated by behavior to insincerity. For me, a serious musician, rock and roll at best remains insincerely sincere. Shouted out full blast, no matter the material, encircled by synthetic effects, hyped by glitz, and delivered in falsetto, falsetto, a register much higher than one's normal voice, much like a child's unpersuasive whimpering, merely to capture attention. Such sincerity coagulates to dramatic irony and ultimately to percussive cleverness, where rock and roll's practitioners continue to strive valiantly, holding to paths of least opposition, only to find premature perdition at the tender age of 27. They don't survive to become mediocre. That is, neither entirely good nor entirely bad, but neither do they live to become masters. All this an unquantifiable waste. Most hipsters struggle to hide from the self, getting lost in the next fix. Though outfitted with singular skills and natural talents, they hardly get to explore, nor nurture their gift to fruition, a fruition which would even surprise them, I'm sure. Like so much of chic culture these days, the cloying practice of maudlin sincerity eventually escapes into ambiguous irony when, ironically, it then takes on the self-defeating trappings of cleverness. We all, at this juncture, reflexively and collectively gawk until the once glamorous hipster is reduced to a tabloid punchline. The culture has infected untold legions of youth whose old age wears survival scars, wears them badly, I might add, in old Baldy's ponytail, tattoos, and jive lingo on Geritol. The tragic subtext is that Amy Winehouse died, and the playlist hardly budged, as one critic sadly remarked. I flipped after the news broke, expecting to hear the rendition of Rehab, or You Know I'm No Good, or Tears Dry on Their Own. But nothing poured out of the speakers. And oh yes, during my research for the program, another immortal died at 27. Richard Turner, less than a month after Winehouse. This teaches that paths of least resistance that remain the route through life result in a knowledge so thin it hasn't the stamina to achieve wisdom. It reflects solely the bratish manifestation of attitude which, for too long, fools others until it fools only itself, much like the child who falsely cries for attention. As an artist, I am well aware that art and literature are magical metaphors. All the world's a stage is a metaphor. Art forever lies, tells lies in order to entrap the larger truth. This is what nourishes art, like the truths found in the music of genius, giants who'd scorn slick paths of least resistance. Take Beethoven, who battled deafness to go on writing music which lends us a glimpse of the eternal. Yes, the world's a stage, but unlike the hipster, Beethoven got over that stage at 13 and a half, not 27. Had Beethoven died at 27, we would have gone, bereft of the matured immortality ever falling on human ears. Hipsters never seem to get genuinely past 13 and a half. The lies their talents tell go halfway around the world, while the truth is putting on its shoes. Thus, the insincerely sincere lack an alignment and misalignment between the inner and outer self, for that self is generally in flight from its all too unwilling host. The wily and the clever schemer both dare never to risk being authentic, nor being around for the menace of a fixed meaning. Beware the theatrical mask worn by these phonies. They've had the damn thing on so long they can't even yank it off. The ground shifts under their feet as they grope their way through the accumulated rubble of their trendy lifestyles. Now is what matters, and the now invites its curtain of night to part, so to seize and fulfill its death wish. Yes, the irrevocable division of the self is the heavy price one pays to pseudo-sincerity, wending its way onto paths of least resistance, paths whose rush hour traffic jams are directed by these all too clever and these all too hip who never learn to make haste slowly. Where in all this can be found the renewal of Western civilization? Back in the 60s, the chant was, "Western civ has got to give, and give we done did." Perhaps all too clearly and unequivocally becomes the reason I call to account those who would wound Western civilization, the benevolent force of their very freedoms. They would replace it with license, which holds freedom a hostage to inevitable tyranny, a tyranny which of all things sincerely, ironically, and cleverly promises order, the order to empower only itself. Now, hear this. While viewing the Democratic Party's convention filled with energy and expectation, there came the moment that reflects all I've been saying regarding the weak links of our otherwise honest existence. Asked from the rostrum was the question, shall the word God be in a plank in the Democratic platform? God was voted down 3 times, but the last shouts were ignored, and God nonetheless was made a plank by behind-the-scene forces. The vote was a travesty, its passage a mockery, and I thought how 12 years ago, was born one who not at 27 but at 33 was affixed to 2 planks and left to die, to willingly die for our sins, even myth, if myth it be for those of you too clever for the likes of me. Even myth deserves better than fools in party hats, waving little flags and even littler slogans. There's small use of planks and platform if we have lost our foundation. When I mention this incident to some of my hip Democratic friends, one piped that planks and platforms are mere figures of speech, and I replied, "Oh, you mean like in God we trust?" And there was silence. Yes, 'tis well noted that great works transcend time, but even the best stagings are products of their moment. They merely process the seductive illusion or possess the seductive illusion of authenticity. Their value is the value I attach to cleverness. Cleverness in Sunday dress, you know, the kind that pretends to rarely need laundering. To the hipster, I close with this loving admonition. Great music is God's voice resonating throughout one's being. The rest, why, the rest is noise. Lastly, allow me to remind you of the image all too many of us have witnessed, and that is rock groups flying into outbursts, obscene tirades, and instrument destruction, all indicative of discipline having gone on a vacation, while performance becomes catch as catch can. Excuse me. It's hip, it's hopeless, but for naive onlookers, it promises the death of judgment, and man, that's cool. Who needs anybody's permission? All we want is forgiveness. There now you have most of the weak links in our otherwise chain of honesty. It's well time to forge stronger ones. And next time we meet, I will be engaging in a discourse on how to forge stronger links. I do so by impeaching certainty. Wow, certainty. How certain we all are. And there you have it, my friends. Remember, insincerity, cleverness, irony, and the hipster culture are wound together in a tight knot of failure, sans even refinement. Until we meet next, I implore you to keep the faith.
If you have any comments or other remarks, and that I perhaps could even read on some of these broadcasts, please do not hesitate to write to me, Carmine Arena, P.O. Box 1029, Larchmont, New York 10538.